Happy holidays. My name is John Parker. I'm a partner in Gowling WLG Dubai office in the IP team. And what we thought we would run through at the end of this interesting year is a look back over the last 12 months to see IP developments in the UAE and the wider region, but to also look forward to an IP new year in 2021 and see what we may have going forward, what you may be able to expect. And I'll introduce my colleague.
I'm Rachel Armstrong, also in the Gowling IP team based here in Dubai in the UAE, and I will be crystal ball gazing as to what we think is coming up and what we've got to look forward to in 2021 and some of the developments we see on the horizon.
So looking back to 2020, it's been an interesting year for all of us. And from Gowling WLG in the UAE, we hope you've all stayed safe and well over the last 12 months and will do going forward. One of the interesting things we saw quite early on in the lockdown was significant fee reductions to IP matters. So many of you will be aware that the region is generally one of the most expensive for trademark protection, in particular around the world. At the end of March, at the very outset of lockdown here, the Ministry of Economy announced over 1,000 fee reductions, one of which was a 30% reduction in official fees for UAE trademark filings, which reduced those fees by $600, which just shows you how expensive they were. But it was a welcome reduction at a welcome time for brand owners and the profession here in the UAE. The other thing we've seen a large uptake in, as has happened in other countries around the world, is of course e-commerce. So many brands moving online perhaps for the first time, and existing online players expanding their offering. This of course brings with it certain IP challenges, including perhaps a greater emphasis for brand owners to monitor online enforcement and for potential infringements of their rights. And I think with that we've seen some developments through customs, which probably ties into e-commerce, in that one of the developments from customs over the last year or so has been an increase in customs seizures of counterfeits at airports. There's something like a third of all seizures over the last year have been at airports. And what we suspect this means or shows is counterfeiters are sending smaller packages to direct consumers who are buying through e-commerce platforms than perhaps was happening in the past. So counterfeiters are moving away from traditional shipping of counterfeits to sending smaller packages through air freight and air mail and couriers, etc. Some other developments over the last year. Saudi Arabia has gone through some significant changes. We've seen the establishment of SAIP and its greater role within intellectual property in the kingdom, so SAIP being the Saudi Arabian Intellectual Property Authority. And we've also seen the first non-traditional mark, as in a sound mark, issued in Saudi. So it was for a musical mark, which was protected through musical notation, but also they have been looking at other forms of non-traditional mark, an area where previously you met with quite forthright objections, let's say, or refusals to such applications. The other big news we've had from the UAE and some other countries in the region is, of course, the signing of the Abraham Accord. So this is the normalization of relationships with Israel and the UAE. This was signed earlier this year and came about in August. At the same time, Bahrain also normalized its relations with Israel. And already as a firm and as a profession, we are seeing Israeli companies looking to protect their interests here, and also companies from here going to Israel to protect their IP rights. Just last week, Morocco also announced its normalization with Israel. And so again, it's a real area of change and development here. And just in the last couple of weeks, the very first patent filed by an Israeli entity was lodged here in the UAE for, believe it or not, a COVID-related tech application for helping to trace COVID over recent times. So it's been a time of great change and great developments. And Rachel, do you think this will continue for the year ahead?
I mean, I'm really pleased to see that the end of 2020, which I'm sure we'll all agree has been a challenging year, has been more positive. I think certainly in the region we've seen some positive developments, certainly. I think one of the things, particularly from a trademark perspective, we're really excited about is the discussions around Saudi Arabia and potentially the UAE acceding to Madrid. That would be fantastic for both international brand owners looking to protect their rights in this region, but also for local companies looking to expand its protection globally. So I think that's a potential development we may see in 2021, and if we don't see the accession in 2021, I think at least we'll get a lot further down the road, which I think is a really, really positive development. One of the other things we've seen, which I think has had a real impact, is the changes in the ownership structure requirements, both the recent development in the UAE, which our corporate colleagues will covered off in some articles, and I won't go into detail here, but certainly the change in the ownership requirements to potentially 100% ownership structures in the UAE for foreign companies will, I'm sure, have a positive impact on IP and the IP commercialisation of those IP rights in 2021 and going forward. So I think that'll be a really positive area and something we'll see growth in. I think from a tech perspective, we've seen a development here with the DIFC, the International Financial Centre here in Dubai, issuing its data protection law. And certainly there's conversations and discussions around a federal law coming into place, which is likely to be similar to the GDPR or a similar type framework. Again, whether that happens in 2021 or a couple of years' time, I think it'll be really interesting to see how that develops. And really, as John said, I think the Abraham Accord and the impact that's going to have on Israeli companies doing business in this region, and similarly local companies here moving into Israel, particularly in the tech space, to leverage some of that expertise. I think that'll be a real change and something we're looking forward to. And I think particularly for Dubai, it wouldn't be a discussion about 2021 unless we touched on Expo. It was unfortunate for all of us to see Expo being delayed with all the efforts that have gone into it and the planning for Expo 2020. But I think everyone agrees it was certainly the right decision, and we're really looking forward to hopefully the launch of Expo 2020 in 2021 later next year. So I think that's certainly something we're all looking forward to, and it'll be great to see sort of the developments in the region that come out of that exhibition as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's been an interesting year. I think there are huge opportunities and huge developments yet to come. So I think for everyone, keep an eye on developments for this region. We will update you as and when things arise also, but in the meantime, happy holidays to one and all, and from us both, an IP New Year.
IP New Year.